Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so it's June, it's time to do my 6-month ranking series, and the first video in the series was 2023 champions released thus far. We released that yesterday, and today we are gonna be taking a look at 2022 champions. I'm gonna split this in two parts. We're gonna go from the less successful champions to the most successful champions. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at spots 24 to 13. In tomorrow's video, we're going to be going to the best 12 champions of 2022. And as always, these videos are a mixture of my personal views and the current game relevance and trends. I am not trying to insult the honor of your family. I am not trying to belittle, your own personal opinions. They can obviously differ from mine. We all care about different things in the game. Often, many things depend on what type of mastery setups we like to use, what game modes we're focusing on, what playstyles we prefer, so on and so forth. But at the same time, there are some things such as objectively being present in the top of the game in competitive scenarios, which I personally put quite a lot of value in, because in my experience, any champion that does well in the most competitive scenarios also does well pretty much everywhere else in the game for most part. That being said, when it comes to 2022 champion rankings, they are obviously subject to change, as they have been thus far, because the longer the champion is in the game, the better understanding we have of that champion. Often it takes a while for those champions to shine or reveal themselves. Champion relevance in itself always by default depends on what metas we have in game, what contents are being released, what kind of trends Kabam is following, and we have seen many champions rise and fall over the years due to Kabam's conscious content decisions. All that said, I'm gonna give you guys a quick look at how the list used to look like. And we did not include Misty Knight and Jessica Jones in the previous list because, sorry, not Misty Knight, Mantis. I actually need to fix that really quickly. Whoopsies. That's a big bit of a whoopsie moment here. So just give me a second. Mantis and because they were brand new, basically. So you can see that we went from Captain Britain at the very bottom to Hulkling at the top, and there are quite a lot of changes since. Some champions got overestimated by everyone, myself included. Some champions got underestimated by everybody, myself included. And now that some time has passed, obviously we do have overall better view of these champions. That said, let's get to it. And as we can see, I am back at Auntmay. Super awesome, mega special website. Very convenient to use. We filtered out 2022 champions, and here we have all 24 of them. So the worst champion of 2022. Now let's make something again quite clear. 2022 didn't have any absolutely garbage champions. Every single one of the champions released in 2022 for most part does have some specific situations where they are very, very good in, and with the exception of a handful of champions, I would say, we see all of them present to a larger or smaller degree in the game currently. So that's a very good indicator. However, bottom 3 spots, I would say 4 spots, definitely could have benefited from tuning, tune-ups, balance changes. And that is something important to remember, because balancing was not a thing at the beginning of the year. So a lot of these champions, potentially could have been better, but balancing didn't exist. And, well, they just stayed quite mediocre or below that. So spot number 24 still goes to Captain Britain. Something wrong with Auntmay website, but Captain Britain is just not good enough. That's the way to kind of characterize a champion. Anything she does, there's a whole bunch of champions that do better. Anything she's designed for, it's not all that effective. Only times Captain Britain has been relevant is when you need to place debuffs on opponent or there are some significant damage mitigation nodes. And I think there was like 1 or 2 metas in Battlegrounds where she was, good, decent defender. Other than that, obviously, there are a handful of people who like the character, and I can kind of get why. But if we break down Captain Britain, which I'm not going to do fully, the point is she gains prowess effects. We have many, many, many mutants that gain prowess effects faster, easier, and more powerful prowess effects. She inflicts debuffs on opponents. We have a ton of champions that do the same. Ultimately, she's kind of designed as, high special attack damage, special crit type of champion that does much better against champions that shrug off debuffs. But again, we have stuff like Bishop and whatnot that just do it so, so much more effective. The end result is there are virtually no fights where you would ideally bring in Captain Britain. If you have a choice, probably going to want to go with something else because ultimately she's also a ramp up character. And this game is not kind to ramp up characters, regardless of what anybody says, unless that ramp up is like very quick and convenient. We don't really do ramp up characters because 99% of the fights that we do are relatively short for alliance work, casual questing, battlegrounds, whatnot. And even as a ramp up character for longer fights, just not good enough. So everything and anything about Captain Britain, in my opinion, is just below average. Not that she's unusable, it's just that there's no reason to use her because there are so many better options. Obviously, if you get her as your like first 6-star champion or something, you're gonna get stuff done with her. But if you have a choice, then this ain't it. So yeah, Captain Britain deserves to stay at the bottom. And the next champion that I would kind of characterize as one being hardly used, he's getting a little bit of use right now. It used to be Shuri, but Shuri obviously got the balancing change, and Shuri is significantly better now to a point where she's probably going to be quite popular, Battlegrounds mainstay champion because a domino counter and speed. So, other things remaining relatively the same, next champion, Sam Wilson. And it is quite unfortunate with Sam Wilson because I really, really like his kit and I like the character. And I was really hyped for when he's going to be released because he has power control, he can bypass stuff like masochism and so on and so forth. Has, access to raptures, he doesn't crit, he bypasses miss. There's a lot in his kit that you do like and love, but the reality is he is quite a high upkeep type of champion where there's a ton of things happening and you need to pay attention to a ton of things, which leads the fights to be quite stressful or not necessarily easy to manage. It just does not quite flow right. And on top of it, it's not quite worth it. Like typically if we have a champion that requires you to be like on top of the game and very complex or kind of finicky time and watching playstyle, you always expect the payoff to be massive. Like there has to be something special that happens if you do everything right with these champions. And with Sam Wilson, it just doesn't. Ultimately, damage is not like completely garbage, but it's nowhere good enough for the amount of attention and effort required to get there to begin with. And again, so many good abilities in character, and I really wish he would be doing better, but he just is not. And with the buff to Shuri, with the new addition of tech champions this year, he has less and less chance to be like picked up and noticed. And he's definitely a champion that you can do plenty of things with, but yet again, for virtually any task, you'd much rather pick something else. If there are more tech champions that do not crit, that can work fine. There are more tech champions that um, have all the abilities that you're looking for. And it's a shame. I think if he got a balance update, if he get a higher chance to trigger his armors, if his sap charges lasted longer and it would be easier to trigger them, if it would be higher uptime on his bulwark passive, that's super important in his kit, and so forth, he would be very, very good champion. But at the moment, he's just not quite there. And with that, also, he's never really found home. He's okay, but he's not okay enough to really settle himself as a necessary part of contest, to a point where if you delete Captain Britain, or in this case, Sam Wilson, I think majority of the player base would notice for a while, and those who wouldn't mind too much, aside from obviously the resource invested. I know it's harsh, but it's true. He just isn't required, needed, or demanded for. That's not to say that you can't do stuff with him, just to say that there are many, many far better options for everything this guy does. That are easier to play, do more damage, and so on and so forth. So he ain't it at the moment either. That's not to say if you like the champion, you can't get the job done. I know that there are, again, just like with Captain Britain, I know that there's somebody with a rank 5 Captain Britain. I know that there are people who love Sam. That's great. But somebody has to be at the top, somebody has to be at the bottom, and Sam just isn't climbing up. Spot number 22 is Wong. And I know that I'm going to get grief from Wong fans, or more specifically, I'm going to get grief from people who pulled Wong as 7-star and all of a sudden swear by him. And that's going to be the truth. Pretty much nobody cared about Wong until he was released as 7-star, and now that he is as a 7-star, people are like, yeah, he's quite cool though. I mean, he is cool, and that was always one of those things about Wong where he can be one of the most amazing fun champions in the game once you properly ramp him up. But ramping him up ain't easy. Again, lots of timer watching, needs some cooperative AI, you need to be on top of that. Most importantly, it's a really, really long process. Another champion which could be tremendously improved with some balancing, reduce the amount of spells needed to ramp up from 3 to 2 each, let his level 1s also refresh those spells on top of whatnot, and you'd have a good character. But at the moment, you just don't. He has some relatively moderate defensive value, same as Sam Wilson and Captain Britain, to be honest, but offensively, in majority of the cases, even though he's not, garbage tier, he's also far from your go-to option for some sort of offensive nuke. You're not going to go in KBQ with Wong. You're not going to necessarily want to, use Wong as your primary BG Mystic attacker when you have champions like Longshot and Tiger and whatnot available. And yeah, the guy just does not have a home. He is, again, a ramp-up character that is already, tough to be noticed or recognized in this game unless you ramp up tremendously quickly. Wong doesn't. He needs like 12, 14 special attacks to fully ramp up. And then one of the more annoying things about Wong as well is a significant part of Mystic Kit and Mystic Utility is hidden behind Special 3, and he in theory can get there. But it's pointless if you do it early in the fight, and you really do need to ramp up before you can access his buff control. And other than his level 3, there's no real buff control in his kit either. There are obviously going to be specific scenarios when some of these spells are going to be putting in a ton of work, but in general, yeah, it's a shame, but he's a bit of a hobo, in my opinion. And, well, hopefully in future that gets changed, but at the moment, and from what I see, majority of the players really do not put too much value in Wong, and any kind of surgent popularity he has right now, largely just down to the fact that he's one of the first 7-stars in the game. Alright, let's move forward. Now that I am already hearing clicking in the comment section, typing ferociously about what kind of an idiot I am, because that happens every time I make these videos. I'm going to get one comment that's going to say 100% agree, and then I'm going to get another comment saying that I'm an idiot, I know nothing, I should learn how to use that champion, and so forth. Right, let's move on. And above Wong, I'm actually going to be putting in Misty Knight. And Misty Knight is yet another champion that I personally quite like, and I have used Misty Knight to varying degrees of success here and there. And she does have some very, very cool things going for her. Namely, you can spend the entire fight basically being unblockable with guaranteed crits. And that's quite cool. She has some defensive value as well, despite being relatively squishy, because she can evade, she can shrug off debuffs. They are random chances, so it's relatively useless offensively because you can't rely on it. But defensively, they make things harder. And Misty Knight overall is a champion that's very, very easy to like. And I do. And she can be useful and helpful in some instances. But realistically, there are several things that are bringing Misty Knight down quite tremendously. Like number one is she doesn't really have any attack modifiers in her kit at all, and her base hit damage, even getting guaranteed crits, is still relatively small. And the shame is that it could be very easily fixed with like a couple of changes. Now, running Recoil Masters with Misty Knight takes care of a lot of those problems, but she's not particularly recoil friendly. So breaking it down, one of the biggest problems with Misty Knight, aside from her SIG ability, is she has basically double effects here that kind of nullify each other, and it seems like a waste in her kit. So when you reach equilibrium at 3 charges, you gain this precision. And having precision obviously is quite helpful until you realize that gaining 9 charges equilibrium gives you guaranteed crits. And this precision is completely useless because all your hits are guaranteed. So instead of that, if this could be like a fury buff or a cruelty, she'd be awesome, right? She'd be absolutely awesome if this was cruelty or a fury buff. And then once you kind of ramp her up, she'd do enough damage on her base kits. So that would be like one very easy fix. But as an end result, you just crit a lot, but not for much. Another problem with her is that as soon as you use special attacks, you kind of have to start it all over, and she has this like special 2, special 1 loop. But that asks you to forego unblockable guaranteed crits, and so you kind of have to choose the way you will want to play her. So you want to build up your equilibrium as fast as possible, and then you can either gain it and benefit from the guaranteed crits and blockable, or you want to go for cold snap level 1 burst. In most cases, it's not really practical, so she's also one of those champions where quite often you just don't want to use a single special attack and keep yourself at 3 bars of power. That also doesn't quite fit well. I think there should be some sort of mechanics that let you regain your charges if you do something right, for instance, after a special attack, but there's none of that option. And you kind of have to drop your unblockable and guaranteed crits if you want to use your power. And lastly, she has just garbage awaken ability. Her awaken ability, screams 2014 or 2015, and even champions from that long time back in the day have better abilities. Because the problem with this SIG ability is even at SIG 200, you only get about 40% uptime off it because it takes for the investigation to start. And then once it starts, obviously, it finishes after a set amount of time and needs to start all over again. So it has maximum 40% uptime in a fight. You do not get it at the start. And all of these effects are relatively subpar. Like, Misty gains a fury buff for each bleed currently on her. Like, 9 times out of 10, if you're bleeding, you're dying. If opponent has 2 or more armor up buffs, Misty's special attack 1 connects, second armor breaks applied. 9 fights out of 10, you don't want to use her special attacks, so that's never going to happen, and it only happens against champions that have 2 or more armor buffs, which, is very limited amount of champions and fights, and so on and so forth. All of these are just weak, bad effects on a garbage uptime. So, there are many things holding her back. Despite that, she does have her use, again, being able to basically be unblockable from the very first hit of the fight, should you choose to do so, has the ability to bypass auto block due to that, and access to guaranteed crits. There are uses, it's just that for all the good, there are plenty of bad around her kit. Despite all of that, I personally still like her and enjoy her. I just don't value her too highly. Now let's move on forward. And next champion at the moment I am going to be putting in Mantis. And the Mantis is kind of cool type of nuke where you can get like a massive level 2. And again, since she's 7-star, she's gaining a surge in popularity. And the coolest thing about Mantis is that we are going to get a buff for her relatively soon. So we're going to see what happens there. And the whole tranquilize mechanic, I really do like that she completely basically shuts down most of the science champions. But there's also kind of a problem with that. You shut down the debuffs from science champions, you reduce accuracy for other champions, and that's the only thing you do. As a skill champion, she doesn't counter evade, she doesn't stop unstoppable, she doesn't deal with like regions or power gains, she doesn't have access to any damage or time effects. And one of the weird things that has gotten in the way often for her is also the fact that you need to be charging your heavy attack in order to access your big damage on level 2, which means you can't use your heavy attack freely, and more nodes and champions kind of demand it. And therefore, it's very hard to line her up. For instance, if you're going up against ebb and flow heavy knockdown node, you can't drop your heavy attacks freely. Uh, and just having her heavy attacks restricted to you being forced to use them at very specific moments if you want to do the damage does bring a lot of harm to her usability and versatility in many fights. That also said, her only additional piece of utility of cleansing the actual debuffs that do come through being put on level 1 and completely destroying your damage output also is, in my opinion, relatively unsuccessful design. So, as an end result, she's quite nukish character, but she has a lot less versatility that I want from virtually all my skill champions. Again, no actual ability accuracy reduction just for the debuffs, and only that is reliable against science champions. Again, you do not counter most of the annoying effects like miss and evade and unstoppable and big power gains or big regens or none of that stuff. Effectively, to me, she appears as a relatively bare bones nuke. And the biggest problem in that is that we have a ton of nukes that are safer to play and potentially have high damage output. Because she also requires you to have aggressive playstyle and you to be confident in using. So ultimately, I think there are some makings of a really good champion. It just feels quite incomplete and relatively restricted. Still, again, not the worst character. I have her as a 7-star. As I start using her more, maybe I'll like her more. But at the moment, I'm not the biggest fan. Moving up, we're going to have one of the champs that did move up due to balancing, and that is Atuma. And Atuma is significantly better now, for sure. He's a better defender, without a doubt, now than he used to be. And he's also more potent offensive champion, primarily because he can start with concussion now at the beginning of the fight. He has improved cruelty timers, and he can actually not only ramp up to a very, very good damage output in long fights, but in relatively medium level fights, he can perform well enough. That combined with absolutely unique interactions with ability accuracy reduction and concussions, access to permanent healing via his concussions, access to, true accuracy buffs. I just think he has more going on for him, and now he's actually more playable. Still not the best attacker, but I think when you combine offensive and defensive prowess, he definitely is doing better. And this is going to be yet another one of those things where everybody is going to be harping at me. Because how can you put Atuma ahead of, I don't know, Mantis or something? Because Mantis has big yellow numbers. Yeah, but Atuma just does more. Still think his kit is not the most successful because it still involves timer watching. It still involves you being able to play high tempo. But ultimately, the improvement is definitely there. And I am actually starting to see him being used more often as well, which is quite reassuring. All right, let's move on. And spot number 18. And I'm going to give it to Sauron. Sauron, without a doubt, is a champion that, in my opinion, is undertuned. I think he'd be a very, very good champion. Would Kabam have been better with his, numbers, with his degen damage, with his prowess damage, with burst damage that he deals and stuff like that. He does feel undertuned to a point where he can feel somewhat underwhelming unless you're using Liquid Courage Double Edge. With Liquid Courage Double Edge, though, he does turn into a significantly better champion. The reason why I do rank Atuma high, Sauron higher in this video though, is quite straightforward because he is putting in work, because he is actually proving himself, and obviously with the release in 7 stars, because seeing more people take interest in him, but also actually start using him more for different metas, because he does have a few of these kind of like understated advantages for a champion, uh, like the fact that he has access to passive degens, passive bleeds, passive unblockable effects. There is not a single buff in his kit. The fact that he's quite straightforward to play. The fact that he can be tripping up people on defense. And if we are comparing the champions, then I think Atum is definitely getting used more often in more places across the contest. Obviously, he's staple Alliance War Defender. He was putting in his work in Eternity of Pain, for example, like one of the best crossbones counters, if we recall. He has, again, extremely good synergy with Recall Mastery Tree. He's immune to regen rate modification, has access to regen as well, has interesting interactions with ability accuracy reduction, and is extremely straightforward to play, as I mentioned before. And that is the thing that kind of put me over, made me rank him over Atuma. Because Atuma, to do anything, really does require high pace, high tempo. Sauron, just as basic as it comes, in my opinion. And it just works well, just about well enough. I think there is, again, massive room for improvement with him as a champion. And the existence of Nimrod is an absolute dread to this guy. But that goes for pretty much all the mutants. Right. Move on. Spot number 17. Spot number 17 is going to go to Wiccan. Now, Wiccan has slid down a bit. Initially, I do think, or after a while, he got much more attention, which has definitely kind of been taken away. Part of it was down to specific Alliance War tactics and changes in metas and which bosses got used. And ultimately, I still think Wiccan is solid champion. He is. He's just not insanely amazing. He does things well, but virtually everything he does, he's somewhere in the middle of the pack or towards the bottom. Out of all the neutralized champions, which are 4 in the game, by the way, he's third. Only ahead of Purgatory, which is notoriously crappy champion. Obviously, Tiger and Rintra are better. Against champions that would like nuke cosmic champions with many mystic buffs, we still have champs like Longshot and whatnot that do it faster and more effectively. And with all the upsides to Wiccan, he also has quite rubbish base stats. He has significantly negative physical resistance, which means that every time you get hit, it's gonna hurt a ton. He has one of the bottom 15 health pools in the game, which means, again, you're gonna get hit, you're gonna get KO'd. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds him down. I especially considering that like one of his core mechanics with one of the spells is dash back and hold your block, which often will result you with getting hit in the block as well. So there's going to be some chip damage to it. And he does have a lot of good things going for him, without a doubt. I just don't think it quite holds up to scrutiny when you put him up to the champions that do similar things. And then his stat becomes the bigger problem. Like, if he had average tankiness and he did everything he did, he'd be much more popular. Or if he was as squishy as he is, but he'd be nuking in speeds of Longshot and whatnot, he'd be more popular. And this is one of those things where I think that champion balancing didn't quite get it right, and they took away too much from him with his stats to make his abilities shine. That being said, obviously there's still use for him in the game. He has access to very, consistent neutralize, access to plenty of damage over time effects, buff control, all that other stuff. Plenty to like about the champion. I just think that Kabam were a bit too harsh on him balancing or upon the release. And they could have balanced him up. They could have tuned him up, but they didn't. So I think it's a bit of a shame. That said, let's move on to spot number 16. And spot number 16, I'm just going to give Jessica Jones. I'm going to keep it relatively brief for Jessica Jones because I think a lot of people do not like to talk about her. She is primarily a defender without doubt, and she can be quite tricky to take down. However, there are more and more champions that are effectively countering her abilities, especially if you have access to cleanse, which is basically a key, or if you can nuke her down. And initially, as she arrived, she was like a massive problem on defense. And the longer time passes, the more cleanse champions get released. I just don't think she's all that rough to fight against, uh, especially if you know exactly, how her abilities work. And offensively, she's actually better than many people think. But the biggest problem with Jessica Jones offensively is that if you do want her to be reasonably, viable, you pretty much have to run the Resonate Mastery, which most people do not want to do, because then you significantly improve her ramp up speed and her damage actually goes up to par. Offensively, there are a lot of utilities that I like about her, like a built-in taunt, for instance, and her tankiness when you do happen to make mistakes, pretty much persistently being unstoppable against opponent, and so on and so forth. But it just isn't quite potent enough in a generic situation for her to be considered, offensively viable champion, let's say. She has, not to the same degree, kind of similar disposition as to Korg, where 90% of her use goes on defense. You can use Jessica Jones offensively with Resonate Mastery to a moderate success, kind of similar to how you can use Korg offensively with a couple of synergies that can give him decent damage, but it's just not quite worth it. Let's move on. Spot number 15. Spot number 15, I will be giving out to Toad. And Toad is a champion that unfortunately just suffered from the mutant condition called Nimrod exists. If Nimrod wasn't a thing, Toad would be so much more popular. Obviously, he gets countered by more tech champions like Warlock and Omega Sentinel and whatnot. But ultimately, Nimrod is the one that takes it to ridiculous levels and how quickly these guys die. But he does have a lot of good things going on for his kit, with more and more interesting skill champions being released. His passive poison ability against skill champions being as potent as it is definitely is a huge benefit. He is one of the best skill nukes in a sense. And on top of it all, obviously having access to passive stuns, having access to slow, plenty of debuffs, prowess, decently large numbers, regen, is putting him at a point in a game where I think Toad is kind of a description of perfectly well balanced champion. He's somewhere in the middle in the game overall, or maybe slightly above that because we have outdated champions, but you guys know what I mean. He's not insanely amazing. He's not awful. He has his uses every now and then. He's not like a mainstay must-have mutant rank up. He's far from a bad pull or a bad rank up. And in general, yeah, I think there's nothing fine. He doesn't. There are few people in my comments that are an absolute Toad crazy fans, but in general, my personal opinion, and from what I see him being present in the game, is some people run him, sometimes many people don't. He has his uses, can do well, can do poorly, and there is a time and place for this guy, and I think perfectly balanced guy. Moving on, I'm going to be putting in Gore. Gore's tune-up was one of the more successful tune-ups in my opinion, significantly increasing his shadow magic buff, significantly improving his utility and auto-block countering. And as an end result, we do have a very solid champion that I think more and more people are coming to appreciate now, especially because they have a 7-star, has access to a ton of buffs, access to a ton of debuffs, which in itself often is one of the main, what utility bits that you are looking for. Insane fight finish ability with his level 3s. He is not necessarily the fastest, but he is quite versatile. I believe if you are still doubting Gore, check out my video on Gore. It will likely change your mind, where I took him through the ringer and used him against, most popular Battlegrounds and Alliance War champions, and he does extremely well if you put a bit of faith in him. Synergizes well with Venom Relic as well, which is quite convenient for him. And yeah, I think in right situations, obviously he's crazy good defender that can become basically unkillable if you do not have a proper counter. Mystics counter him plenty well, which is as, you know, it should be in my opinion. And similarly, he has very, very, very good offensive matchups. Uh, Therefore, he works as a dual-purpose champion, and he does it well enough, and he's usable enough after the buff up. And I have been seeing him more and more being present in the game, and I hope that trend grows. Personally, really do enjoy the guy, and I'm happy that he got the tune-up. And yeah, he is better than many, many people would give him credit for, in my opinion. Now, yeah, again, obviously, pretty much a staple Alliance War defender. Champion that actually got one of my last couple deaths in War as well, because it's quite easy to get KO'd by him, and it's always quite scary to fight him if you do mess up at the wrong moment. It's gonna hurt. Anyways, Gore number 14, and spot number 13, so the best of the lower half, even though realistically the final 5 or so champions were like perfectly fine, middle of the pack champions. At the moment, I'm going to put in Shuri, and the reason why Shuri is here is because, well, the buff is still very, very new. I do actually think that she might climb higher, but her tune-up is, you know, very fresh. And with that said, I already have seen a ton of people using Shuri to counter dominoes, to counter different champions. Obviously, she has her defensive potential as well because she's basically immune to parry because all her hits are projectiles. And that is the thing that I always liked about Shuri. She has a lot of kind of like very random, quirky bits of utility, like the fact that she's immune to precision from your dex mastery, and she doesn't have any other buffs in her kit. In this current power snack meta, lets her work as basically a buff immune champion in most instances. Then obviously access to a ton of debuffs synergizes with inequity mastery, synergizes with despair, controlling opponent's regeneration effects. Now her damage is much, much, much better, and her level 1 refreshing her shocks also enables you to use a brand new loop, basically, where you can just spam level once, and as an end result is she also has guaranteed crits now, starting like second special attack that you throw. And those guaranteed crits, you know, basically never run out if you run her in shorter fights, and that significantly also helps her damage output and makes her much more easy to use or much more customizable, because there are nodes where you want not to crit, which is her default state, and if you choose to, you can avoid landing a critical hit the entire fight. If you choose to, you're going to be pretty much landing only critical hits, and all of those things are really awesome. And yeah, I love the fact that she can take dominoes and many other mutant champions. I like how all of her basic attacks are non-contact energy damage attacks. There's quite a bit to like, and she's also super simple to use, which I love. So champion viable both for offense and defense with super simple rotation, high level of customizability. And how do you go about the damage? And there are different rotations. Obviously, you also utilize her untouchable and have access to phasing if you want to. Yeah, I genuinely like buff Shuri a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised if she moves even higher in this list. But that is it for this video. That is where I stand at the moment, and here is a summary of all that. So Captain Britain still the worst, and now Shuri going from second worst to exactly in the middle, basically. Year 2022 and highest in today's video. Let me know what you agree, let me know what you disagree with, and yeah, I definitely look forward to your input. And tomorrow we'll be finishing the year 2022 with the strongest and most powerful champions of last year. Bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information